Hello, my name is Michael O'Keefe, aka The Movie Wist. If you enjoy this interview and want to hear more top-notch film industry conversations, please press the thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell to stay in the know. Hello, Jane Schoenbrun. What was the first thought that led to we're all going to the World's Fair?
Hi, it's great to be here. Man, the first thought that led to we're all going to the World's Fair probably happened when I was a little kid. but for me, when I traced the genesis of the project in 2014, I first heard about the creepypasta community, which is an online community of horror writers and storytellers who collectively tell each other what is essentially the internet's version of campfire scary stories. But these stories are quite unique in that they're told in the first person, and the conceit, like a great campfire story, is that it's real. It really happened. It really happened to whoever's telling it, and everyone is sort of like building together online in a very democratic way things to really scare each other. So I heard about this in 2014 through this sort of true crime story of the Slender Man, which is probably the creepypasta community's most famous export. This sort of like internet boogeyman that was in the news at the time because these two young girls who were suffering from schizophrenia, undiagnosed schizophrenia at the time, became convinced that this monster that they read about on the internet was real, and actually almost murdered a friend, stabbed their friend 18 times in a quote unquote tribute to the Slender Man. And this had sort of created like an online hysteria about, like, you know, the power of fiction and what the internet is doing to kids and all of these things that when I heard about this, it just triggered something emotionally for me as somebody who grew up on the internet, and who sort of grew up in not in the creepypasta community, but sort of exploring my own identity online. And something about the lens of this whole thing really fascinated me.
Cool. And you made a documentary about it too, right?
Yeah, so I knew I needed to find a way to speak about this community, the creepypasta community, and really to speak about like all of the ideas that and questions that it triggered for me, you know, and it just felt like really fertile ground to explore something very personal about what it is like sort of living through a screen in our modern world. But I didn't know how to tell that story, and I didn't know like what structure would be the best way to explore all of those things. And one of the first things I did was just start gathering lots of videos from the internet, you know, that moved me for some reason, or that I felt like were almost like evidence telling a story. You know, this really started as like a mood reel for what would eventually become my new film, We're All Going to the World's Fair. I was just interested in watching as much like archival as I could. But then it started to take on a life of its own, and it almost was like a research project for the narrative film. But I did end up making a documentary out of all of that footage called A Self-Induced Hallucination, which premiered at the Rotterdam Film Festival a couple of years ago. And it's sort of like a non-traditional experimental documentary that definitely informed my thinking as I continued to play with all of these ideas in my brain and eventually sort of start to construct the narrative film that I'm playing at Fantasia this week.
That's awesome. And tell me about the challenge of going from documentary with this subject matter to a more narrative expression of the same ideas.
You know, one of the hardest things I think for young filmmakers when they're trying to sort of figure out their first feature, you're so passionate and you've got a whole lifetime of experience in your brain and all of these feelings that you want to get out. I think one of the hardest things to do as a young filmmaker is to practice a little bit of restraint and to pare down, you know, like your grand vision into something that is going to resonate on the scale that you'll be able to make a movie at, basically. I tried to think of this movie, We're All Going to the World's Fair, as very homemade. And when I say homemade, I don't mean cheap. I mean very lovingly crafted by a very small and dedicated and really talented group of collaborators, and made in a very personal way. And working from that working from these sorts of limitations as the thing that makes the project inspiring rather than the thing that holds back the project, I think is why the film has resonated with so many people. I want to make bigger films. I want to make epics, and I want to make longer movies. But for my first film, I found this subject matter that fascinated me, and I tried really hard to sort of pare it down to its essence and to tell a story and to create an aesthetic that rang really true.
Awesome. So I love the vibe and the visual aesthetic of the movie for sure. How would you describe the style, like beyond just like, it's a movie about the internet? How would you describe that distilled take of yours?
For sure, yeah. I always listen to music as I'm as I'm writing and as I'm dreaming. It's like a lubricant. It really helps me get to the place I'm trying to go aesthetically. And I think the reason for that is like a lot of the music I'm drawn to, and a lot of the films I'm drawn to, and the art I'm drawn to generally. Like narrative structure is really important to me, but it's almost takes a backseat to things like tone and feeling. I love in music, for instance, I love like the genre of shoegaze music, which is bands like My Bloody Valentine and Slow Dive, who really like they almost took what was traditional rock and roll and like saturated it with just all of this hazy distortion, almost like buried their songs under this very dream-like haze. And I love this music because it's beautiful music, but it also, it feels like listening almost to the memory of music. You can listen to these songs and there's something so mysterious about them. You can sort of disappear into them. You can sort of feel like you're grasping something, but not quite. And these were some of the inspirations that I was drawing from when I tried to sort of think about the aesthetic that I wanted my film to feel like. It has this almost shoegazy, hazy aesthetic where we're using a lot of the tools of cinema, and both like professional cinema and like amateur cinema. Since we are like making a movie about the internet, it's playing on a lot of low fidelity, like the crackle of a VHS tape sort of feelings. But I really wanted to make something that felt dreamy. And to me, emotionally, one of the major feelings that I was trying to sort of express through the tone and vibe of the film was this feeling that I've felt many times at 2 a.m. alone with my computer opening, maybe reading scary stories or maybe just scrolling on Twitter. This strange sort of spooky, eerie feeling of being like alone, but comforted by that like glow of the screen, and that sort of feeling of disappearing into it and then closing your laptop and being back alone in your room. I wanted to make a film, if anything, that evoked that very strange, hard to articulate feeling.
That's very cool and very poetic.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So tell me about, you were talking about Slenderman and stuff, but tell me about your personal relationship with mysticism and how that influences your filmmaking.
My personal relationship with mysticism, I think I'm exploring questions that I don't have answers for, and I think that's what art is. Like my job as an artist and somebody who's just naturally drawn towards art making, I couldn't stop if I wanted to. It's so much about like trying to untangle things that I don't have a language for, and that I don't think there necessarily is a language for. And so like theological and mystical and spiritual questions can certainly be a part of that. And I think there is something inherently mystical and spiritual about this act of filmmaking and trying to sort of like capture an ephemeral moment or feeling or idea. But I'd say that like the chief sort of concern of my practice is first just taking that process really, really seriously and honoring it, and trying to get deep within both myself and whatever the project is that I'm working on, and hopefully like put something out that other people can find a wavelength to sort of attach themselves to. But beyond that, it's an exploration, and it's and like I said, it's questions, and I try really hard to not proselytize, right, and not arrive at anything except an expression of a feeling that I'm trying to articulate.
Understood. I get it. You're looking sort of between the lines, but kind of leaving it lie or something like that. I don't know. So how do you spend time on the internet?
It's too much scrolling on Twitter right now. The film is really, as much as it's inspired by like the present day internet, it's really also inspired by like the internet of my childhood, which was spent first in like AOL chat rooms and Usenet message boards, and then was spent on like horror movie forums as like a 13-year-old, and so much of I think what I'm personally drawing from on the film is like these early experiences that I had as like a young queer person online, sort of like trying to figure myself out by having weird relationships with people that I met online, and through like writing fan fiction online, and like the sort of humbler internet that maybe like Wild West version of the internet that doesn't so much exist anymore. But the film is also trying to speak to like a contemporary internet that has been sort of commodified, and that I certainly still use, and merging all of that was a big goal of mine, was making a film that didn't feel like it was about characters using the present day realist internet, but felt more like this dream or memory of the internet. That was the big goal of mine as well.
Wow. Do you think conspiracy theory documentaries like on YouTube or whatever need to be understood better aesthetically?
I tend to agree that we don't put enough stock as a culture into these aesthetics that are sort of cropping up from the bottom up on places like YouTube, and that the algorithm seems to like, right? Like I'm fascinated by algorithmic logic, and I'm fascinated by the idea that like these are algorithms that are operating usually within capitalist societies, because we live in a capitalist world, and they're sort of designed to favor the things that people want, or the things that get the most views. And the way that incentive is increasingly dominating the media landscape, and is increasingly dominating the content that we're being served. And yeah, on a place like YouTube, a lot of that content is, amateur work that's being made just by people that you'll never know who they actually are, or what their intentions actually are. And I do think it's a really fascinating case study. I'm really fascinated by the way that these sorts of logics are changing all storytelling, from like an amateur level up to the way that we interpret information and interact with others in our daily life. When I think about the narrative structure of the internet that we've all become, very, we have like an advanced sort of legibility in this language. It's such a schizophrenic language, scrolling through various tabs and various news feeds. And one second you're seeing news about a new meteor that's headed to Earth, and the next minute you're seeing news about Donald Trump, and the next minute it's like somebody shit talking a new movie that's out. It's such a it's an insane way to take in information, and it's so far from traditional narrative structure as we've come to think of it, this sort of traditional modes of storytelling that like a more traditional movie than mine might try to sort of package this within, first act, second act, third act, how did the character change kind of stuff. And one of my main goals with the movie was definitely to sort of like try to merge the two, try to merge this sort of new narrative structure of the internet that we've all become quite fluent in, with into the more linear structure of a film.
Cool. So, what are some of your favorite horror movies?
I love horror movies.
Yeah.
I really, I grew up on horror movies. And it's a hard thing to explain to people who don't love horror movies, but there's something about being like 12 years old in suburbia and sneaking into the horror section of your local video store, and taking home a movie that you're kind of scared to watch but kind of excited to watch, and just like it's a magical thing. And I've retained a real love of the horror genre. In my movie, as much as it's a horror movie, it's more a movie, I think, about people who love horror, and about the love of horror, and the comfort of it. Growing up, movies like Scream, movies like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Evil Dead, movies that just felt like magic. Those were my favorites.
Awesome. Do you enjoy the film festival circuit? Like we're talking through Fantasia right now, but this movie played at Sundance, and so and you mentioned Rotterdam. Do you enjoy the circus?
Yeah, I love film festivals, and it's been such a strange experience premiering the film during COVID. You know, we premiered at virtual Sundance, which didn't feel like Sundance usually feels, but was really special in its way. You know, and especially because so many people who wouldn't have been in person in Park City where Sundance happens, the fact that they could all watch the film and participate really fit the themes of my movie well, and I think was like a really special experience to have a premiere that, yes, it was virtual, but it was still this communal event, and to know that thousands of people all around the country were watching my movie at the same time, and we did a live virtual Q&A afterwards. It was quite special, but there really is nothing like in-person film festivals. And you know, the process of making a movie, I wouldn't call it a lonely process because it's, you know, you're surrounded by collaborators, but it's really like you're making something as a team off in your little world so that you can then share it with other people, and, you know, and especially with other creative people and other filmmakers, and to get to sort of travel from festival to festival, which is starting to happen a little more now that the world is maybe, knock on wood, healing a little bit. It's been a really special thing to kind of get back into that IRL world, and actually like, sit in a movie, you know, sit in a movie theater with folks as they actually watch my movie, and, you know, and talk to them afterwards. It's been a really nice thing.
IRL, for people who don't know, means in real life, internet term.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. Well, Jane, thanks for your time. Do you have a final thought about We're All Going to the World's Fair you would like to end this interview with?
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, like I said, it's a movie about the weird loneliness and communal aspects of the internet, and it's playing right now or very soon at the Fantasia Film Festival, which is an amazing genre film festival that usually happens entirely in person in Montreal, but this year is happening virtually as well. So if you're, you know, if you're in Canada and are interested in that sort of experience of a lonely, weird, vibey film about the internet that maybe spooks you out a little bit, you know, please do consider checking it out, and you know, use the internet to tell me what you thought of it.
I recommend everyone listen to Jane because it's a lot of fun. It's a really creepy movie. It's very vibe centric, and like what you were saying about the ambition of it, that's great because it really works. It's not like high concept, low delivery.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But what about the documentary? Where can people see that?
It's not online right now because I really want people to watch the narrative first, because to me, that's like the finished product. I definitely want to re-release the documentary at some point, but first check out We're All Going to the World's Fair.